Hello and welcome to episode 174 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I'm your host, Devon Dundee. I'm joined by my co-host, Sigmund Judge. Sigmund, we've got a lot to talk about this week, including this Friday's fiery streaming premiere of Smoke. But I think a good bit of the conversation today is going to center around an in-person European premiere that took place in your neck of the woods. Of course, I'm referring to the hotly anticipated F1 the movie.
Devon, it's been months and years at this point where we've been talking about the background for this film, but the European premiere took place in Leicester Square this week. Apple kindly shipped over that APX GP car that everyone saw at WWDC just a couple of weeks ago, and of course it got shipped to New York and it's been everywhere, but it's back not that far away from Silverstone. I gotta say, it was an incredible day, seeing the likes of Joe Kosinski, Jerry Bruckheimer, Brad Pitt, Damson Idris, Kerry Condon, along with producer Lewis Hamilton, the Tommy Hilfiger, and costume designer Julian Day, and then famed cinematographer Claudio Miranda, editor Stephen Mirioni, composer Hans Zimmer, and a host of F1 drivers and, of course, musical artists, as well as, of course, Apple Original Films head Matt Dentler and Apple Music creative director David Taylor. They all, of course, posed in front of that APX GP car. Very, very cool. And the day actually started off earlier. I managed to actually get a couple of minutes with both Joe Kosinski and Tommy Hilfiger and Julian Day, all extremely friendly and passionate about their respective crafts. And yeah, it was just a blast, a real fun time. And that all happened before seeing F1 on the biggest IMAX screen in the UK, and I think potentially Europe, at the BFI, with some very special guests that you'll hear from in a matter of moments as we highlight this week's long-awaited and highly anticipated theatrical debut of F1 the movie.
30 years after an accident nearly ended his career, former F1 superstar Sonny Hayes is recruited to help save the struggling APX GP team alongside hotshot rookie Joshua Pierce. But as the engines roar, Sonny's past catches up with him, and he finds that in F1, your teammate is your fiercest competition, and the road to redemption is not something you can travel alone.
When you look in the mirror, you see this old school cowboy. Why did Sonny Hayes come back to F1?
You say he was old, he not that old.
I never should have pulled you into this.
3 laps. 3 laps is a lifetime.
What's he doing?
Plan C. Be ready.
Just gotta hope for some lucky breaks.
Hope it's not a strategy.
Anything else, Professor?
Try fast.
Ever seen a miracle?
Not yet. How do you think I'd feel if you die on the track?
3 laps. 3 laps is a lifetime.
Devon will be back to talk a little about the iPhone camera technology used in the film, but right now I'm joined by two friends that accompanied me to the very first screening of F1 the movie on the biggest IMAX screen in the UK as a special preview earlier this week. Let me welcome Mac Stories writer Jonathan Reed and 9 to 5 Mac Happy Hour host Benjamin Mayo. How you doing?
Doing good, thank you. Good to be here again, Sigmund.
Same.
All right, well, we got to watch F1 the movie. So, with all of the anticipation out of the way now, going into this one, of course, a film that boasts so much talent on both sides of the camera lens. Joseph Kosinski, Erin Kruger with the writing, Jerry Bruckheimer, Claudio Miranda, Stephen Mirioni, Lucy Bevan on casting, and Ben Monroe on production. Where do we want to start? I think initial reactions, really, because it's been a long time coming. There's been a lot said about the film. What was your first thoughts? Because I find you to be a lot more critical than me because I'm more of an enthusiast, let's be honest. And you both seem to be bouncing. 24 hours removed. Yeah. How do you feel?
Yeah, I feel pretty good, actually. I think that I was wondering whether after all this fuss and all this hype, whether it would be a bit of a dud. Apple, unfortunately, have a bit of a track record with their films of being these big budget duds. So I think after all this hype, I was a little bit worried, and I think maybe that helped bringing my expectations down a bit. But I got to admit, it was an absolutely fantastic film. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. It was entertaining from start to finish. It is quite long at 2 hours and a half, but I think it didn't feel like it dragged at all, really. It kind of flew by. It's constantly engaging. It's very funny. Great cast. The racing scenes are really thrilling. And yeah, I thought it was great. I think the irony, is that this is a film which you really need to go and see in the cinema. And yet this is going to be something that Apple are going to use to promote their own streaming service, which I think it will certainly lose a lot of its effect when watched on a TV at home. So if you can see it at the cinema, I'd definitely recommend it. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's definitely firmly in the category of like brainless popcorn fare, you know? Like it's you could almost guess the story before you even sit down.
Yeah.
And obviously it's from the creator of Top Gun Maverick, and it is almost copy pasted in terms of the rough plot line of that film, except for cars. But I watch the F1 races every weekend, and I enjoyed the film as well. There's some nice little Easter eggs and references for people that obviously do follow it, and the team bosses are shown in there, and you get some shots of the drivers. But then obviously most of it just centers around the racing, and they have 4 or 5 big sequences at races from across the calendar. And I mean, it helps we watched it in IMAX, right? But it just comes across really, really well. And I was pretty engrossed the whole way. And it does seem long at 2.5 hours, but I wasn't coming out of it saying it was overly bogged down with anything. The story is pretty bare bones, but that's fine. You know, they move along, and then you have the races. So I loved it.
Yeah, perfect popcorn cinema, I think. If we're thinking about adverts for going to see big films at the cinema, this kind of ranks alongside like Top Gun Maverick and Mission Impossible and those things that you really just need to go to the cinema to watch. But yeah, it's not going to blow your mind in terms of the plot. But yeah, I agree. It's a fun time at the cinema.
Yeah, and I would say this is the second time seeing it on IMAX was the second time I got to see it. So seeing it on a smaller screen and then seeing it on such a huge scale, I think really changed things for me the second time round. There's a physicality of the cars that really I think will only come across in the cinema unless you're fortunate to have your own home cinema. Even then, I don't think you're going to get that same kind of feeling.
I bet it come across pretty well in Vision Pro, pretty engrossing.
That's a good point, yeah.
100%. I mean, so this film is shown normal theatrical run, also in 4DX, which unfortunately I can't check out, but I'm trying to get Devon to do on my behalf. And then there is the Screen X, which is almost like Vision Pro immersive, and I'm excited to rewatch it again in that way. Let's talk about the story. Erin Kruger's written this, and as you said, by the numbers. Sonny Hayes was a 1990s Formula One driver, one of the most promising drivers until an accident on the track. This retired F1 driver is still driving Daytona and I believe anywhere he can. And he's brought back into the fold by a old rival who now is in charge of APXGP, a team that are faltering in F1. They have this rookie driver who, for all of the enthusiasm that he has, needs someone really for him to learn from experience-wise. And so Sonny Hayes is brought in, and it is very much the formula that we've seen of, someone who's trying to make a comeback themselves. There's a Rocky element to this, I'd say, almost. Looking into the story, I was hoping going in that this was going to be like almost a spiritual successor to Days of Thunder, but that's not what this was. It felt very much like Top Gun Maverick or Rocky on wheels, so to speak. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, I mean, it is very much. It does feel a lot of the time like kind of dad wish fulfillment. This would be like This is a perfect like dad film. If you're, hey, I'm a dad, but like I guess like it's that classic sort of old guy who used to be like the greatest comes back and gets a second chance at glory. It's a tale as old as time when it comes to cinema, and to be clear, Brad Pitt is 61 years old, and that is not he in real life. He's not going to be able to properly race at Formula One. That's just not. I mean,
there's no driver that's who's that old in real reality.
Exactly. You are suspending a lot of disbelief in it, but yeah, it does come across. It's very. I mean, like what you said before, Ben. It is very much Top Gun Maverick on the racetrack, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you like Top Gun Maverick, you're definitely going to like this film. So that's, and I mean that as a compliment.
Yeah, and you have to suspend your disbelief as well. If you do watch actual F1, the hijinks they get up to on these races would not be allowed for 1 second in actual F1, right? So I know going up to it, there was a lot of talk about it being super accurate, and the bits that are super accurate are like them in the pit lane, they're doing the process, they're doing the changeover, they're doing the air tunnel, but the actual like racecraft stuff is really stretching a bit of disbelief. I mean, it's fun, but it wouldn't be allowed in the rule book by 5 Ways to Sunday, so they would be they'd be disqualified very quickly if you were going by the rules. But it's just you can't take the story that seriously, I think is what I'm getting at. It's just lightweight, airy. There's some good comedy moments in it. I wasn't really expecting that. There's a lot of jokes, and almost like the A plot line you can kind of predict from the start, but then the B plot line is when they have the little in jokes and the little jests and the bits that go along. That was more original and kind of fun to me, in addition to the racing sequences, obviously.
Yeah, and I think to give it some credit actually as well, what it does do really nicely is it kind of fills up the roster of the rest of the cast, rather than just focusing on Javier Bardem, Brad Pitt, and I forget his name.
Damson Idris, yeah.
Focusing on those two and making Kerry Condon sort of this love interest. They do give plenty of material for the supporting cast, and they got Kim Bodner, who people might recognise from Killing Eve, who has kind of one of my favourite laughs in cinema. Is really fantastic. Kerry Condon is great as always. She's a real talent. I really like her, and even down those, this is kind of slightly nerdy pit lane guy played by Will Merrick. And they all get their time. They all get their sort of scenes with some of the other characters, and that does flesh out the film a lot more, rather than just focusing on our main 3 people. And a lot of the time, Kerry Condon feels like she's holding her film together a bit as well, in terms of these reckless men doing reckless men things. And she's also, doesn't suffer fools gladly either, which was good to see.
Yeah, Damson Idris's character, young rookie, but very much on the side with his mum, who's brilliantly cast as well.
Yes, another great bit of casting. Sarah Niles, people would know for Ted Lasso, plays his mum,
and she was actually cast after the casting director had seen her particular scene in Ted Lasso, when she's talking about the wage gap between men and women, and kind of laying it on Ted Lasso in that regard. And so that's brilliant. A really interesting bit of casting as well, between Damson Idris and his manager, played by Samson Kayo. Interestingly, they have been friends since childhood, and then only found out later on that they'd been cast together in the film. So you can see why there is that connection there on screen as well. It's very natural.
Yeah, they have some nice buddy moments.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's good. I'd not actually heard of Damson Idris before. I never know that. I know he was the main character in Snowfall on FX in the States, but I'd never watched that series, and that ran for several seasons. So he's obviously been around doing stuff, but never seen him in anything before. And he was great. The casting's really good. Even Brad Pitt, who's doing his most sort of smoulderingly sort of Brad Pittish sort of role, and he's covered in tattoos and sitting in ice baths with very stylishly rugged AirPods Max.
Oh, that was the most frustrating part of the film. who's going in an ice bath with AirPods Max on?
They got very wet, and I'm not sure they're that resistant to water.
Like, you're that rich, you're going to have ice bath headphones as well as your normal headphones. Like, you're not going to wear the AirPods Max to bed and also in the ice bath, you know.
Yeah. There was definitely some. I mean, we can't blame them, so that they've paid for the film, but there was definitely some deliberate Apple product placements, like in the wind tunnel or the bit testing the machines. There's about 6 or 7 Pro XDRs, which I would argue is probably not a good screen to have because it's not a high refresh screen, which you would probably need. And they're all using Mac Studios as well, of course. But, it's an Apple film. You come to expect that.
Yeah. Let's talk about the technical aspects for this film, because a lot has been said about the cameras being specifically designed by Sony, a bit of an evolution from the cameras that Claudio Miranda used on Top Gun Maverick. And it's really interesting from a shooting point of view. They shot this film literally in between 5-minute and 10-minute gaps during F1 season. Apple and Apex GP were set up like an F1 team ready to go. So they had to follow all of the different regulations that F1 laid down, including, I think, there was at some point production had a way of building their pit, and they had only 36 hours in which to do so from scratch after it was approved. So there's a lot going on here, but biggest takeaway for me, at least for the film, and where I think it was really done justice, is to F1. I'm admittedly someone from a motor racing family. My grandfather raced the old Nuremberg before it was redesigned, and F1 today, some engineers actually worked with my grandfather beforehand, so that's kind of cool. In regard to the realism, I don't think we've seen anything on screen where we're really with the driver. We've seen, if you go into cinematic history, Grand Prix and Le Mans in the past that have done similar things, but some of the camera technology within this is pretty impressive, and it's giving us vantage points that we haven't seen before, and at the quality that we haven't seen before. I don't think we noticed any difference in terms of the quality, even on an IMAX screen, considering some of the shots were used with, albeit modified, iPhone camera technology.
I think some of the because you can tell which one's the iPhone camera and which ones are the overhead shots, and there is I felt like at some points that they kind of hide it with the blur of just the speed of you moving. You can kind of tell the lens is slightly different, but I mean it's still really good. And obviously we're watching it 200 inches big or screen, however big those screens are. I don't know,
foot maybe
200 meters. I don't know what the IMAX screens are. Yeah, they're crazy because they did film them on track at Grand Prix for the last 2 years or whatever, but they weren't allowed to drive at the same time as what the other drivers actually were, right? So they would generally drive on track alone and then they'd leave. So whenever you see the cars driving, it's comped in with shots of the actual cars driving, right? So they are on set, they did do it for real, but they were never actually driving alongside the actual team's cars because it was, if they crashed into them, they're causing damage to their teams. But I think visual effects wise, the way they comp that together, it's seamless. So it's really well done visually, I thought.
Yeah, I think, and it won't get. This is my sort of bugbear at the moment, but it won't get mentioned. How great a job Framestore, who I think were the lead on the VFX on this. Because the big talk about this is they did it practically. They really raced. Brad Pitt was out on the set. But if you look and if you sort of just take a step back and think about some of the scenes, especially the ones that are crashing and things like that, there's no way Brad Pitt is going to be in a car that crashes at 200 miles an hour or something like that. What they've very, very cleverly done is they've captured the shots of Brad Pitt inside the car driving, then they're, like Ben said, comping in the other cars outside, and then the wide shots are actual shots from the races, which they're then potentially comping Brad Pitt's car in, and making use of the footage that they capture on the real races. So it's very, I mean, we'll probably, unless Framestore release some sort of behind the scenes VFX breakdown, I don't know if we'll ever get a full picture of how they did it all, but it's obviously very clever.
They also did the opposite, where they put the cameras on. So they didn't put just the cameras on the Apex GP cars. They put the cameras on real, like the actual team's cars on the track. And then when you see it in the film, they then, like, all the background and what you're seeing on the track is real, but then the close up of the car livery is replaced with the Apex GP car. So they kind of did it the other way around sometimes as well.
Yeah, so per race they were given access to 3 cars in which they could put cameras on from actual teams, which is amazing, really, to get that kind of access.
And they're using Formula 2 cars as well at some points as well. I read it wasn't always just Formula 1.
So the Apex GP cars that drove around were modified Formula 2 cars.
Yeah, people who are organising the production as a whole, should probably be applauded more than anyone else, because the logistics of this must have been absolutely bonkers. I sometimes have a bad habit of looking for the VFX, and I couldn't see it. I really couldn't. There's a couple of shots near the end with some fireworks that we all sort of spotted, but that wasn't the racing. Which
has nothing to do with the racing. Yeah. Like it's almost like the most mundane shot of the whole thing, and yet that's the one where I feel like the comping's the most fragrant. But yeah, otherwise, like the other 2 hours 36 minutes, it was like flawless. Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
Interestingly, that third act, that was actually shot just 6 months ago. So it's an incredible turnaround, and of course all the VFX and everything else was finished ahead of that. To think that they finished shooting 6 months back and they've turned it around that quickly, I think miraculous. The soundtrack, there's a lot being made of the soundtrack, all very contemporary. It's interesting because I was leading up to this really, really looking forward to the Hans Zimmer score, which is there, and when it is there, I think it does really make an impact. But this is very much headlined by F1 the album artists.
Yeah, the score is definitely overshadowed by just the songs that they've obviously had made for it. And I love Ed Sheeran, so the song they run with at the end, which is The Drive. Pedal down and drive. I love that, but yeah.
Yeah, they do have some. I don't know if it's an actual an artist who's doing it, but there's a couple of the races where they have kind of a pumping, like almost dance soundtrack, and that works really well on a couple of them. It really kind of gets your heart rate going as you're watching these cars fly around the track, which is fantastic. I would say with Hans Zimmer's thing, I actually was slightly disappointed in what we heard of Hans Zimmer. Not because it was bad, but there's a particularly right at the end which sounded very similar to The Dark Knight, and it almost like very identically. And I've listened to that soundtrack many times, and it did feel a bit like some of these sort of beats I've heard before, some of these techniques he's using. But maybe I'm being overcritical.
Have you witnessed recently a film as loud as F1 the movie? I know, as someone that hasn't necessarily gone to a racetrack, you were surprised by, I think, some of the ongoing commentary.
I was a little bit. It seemed very kind of stilted to me, which kind of pulled me out a little bit. But then speaking to you guys afterwards, Ben, you're very familiar with F1 commentary, and you said it was not too far from what they normally do. So maybe
you could tell it was scripted, obviously, but it wasn't miles apart from what because they have to fill in. These races like 2 hours long, and there's not action across the entire 2 hours of races, so they go through a lot of the same kind of stilted lines, and that was relatively close what they were doing with the commentary track. And those commentators are the actual F1 commentators. That's like a nice reference for the fans.
Yeah. In terms of any film that I've seen, it ranks up there in terms of how loud it was. The film that I've seen that's the loudest ever was Mad Max Fury Road, which I was sat on like the third row in Brixton Picture House, and kind of had my face and my ears all melted by the end of the showing, which was, I don't think that's ever going to get beaten. It was great. To be fair, the sound mixing is really good, because I was a bit worried that maybe because they're in their helmets and you might not be able to hear what they're saying properly, but the sound mix is really good, and I could hear what they were saying. I could hear what Brad Pitt and Damson Idris were saying when they were driving around. So yeah, props to the sound mixers.
They seem to do the races where you'd get like a minute of like silence in terms of the script, so they just have the car noise, and then they'd kind of blend it in, and then you get a bit more of the story. Like they felt like they did that on a few occasions where, like the start of the race, they just kind of don't have anyone talk really, and you get the engine roar and you get the smashy crashy stuff, and then they would chill it out a little bit so you could get the actual dialogue. Yeah, I thought it was well mixed.
We kind of kicked off the conversation talking about where Apple original films had got to up to this point. I genuinely think that the output this year has been extremely varied and really top quality. My question for you guys is what your view is on F1 and its place in Apple's output for original films this year. Do we have any hopes for more big theatrical exhibits from Apple and partners in the future? Warner Brothers distributed this one. Napoleon, which I think was the second biggest draw so far theatrically, was in partnership with Sony. So, there was a lot of kind of negative naysaying about Apple's theatrical future.
And officially, they haven't dated any more theatrical.
Yes, that's important to say.
Yeah.
I think that they haven't. That their decision seems to be that they don't want to do this anymore, and we may get the occasional film like F1, where it's a huge, big budget film that they might release. But it doesn't seem like they're interested in that. I think my biggest hope coming out of this film would be that this film is very successful, and that it would mean they'd take a second look at theatrical. Someone who's I'm someone who's a big fan of the cinema going experience. I think it's essential to filmmaking as a whole, and I was previously really happy to see Apple making a commitment to basically releasing almost all of their films at the cinema, and then for them to turn their back on that was incredibly disappointing, and the way they went about it I think was also disappointing. So I hope they do sort of change their mind and we do see more in the cinema. I think my criticism earlier, is more in my reference to their big budget ones. I'm mainly thinking of sort of Argyle, The Instigators, Fountain of Youth. These were these big budget films that they've done, and that they've really just been, sort of rejected critically. And me personally, I didn't think they were good either. But they've had some good stuff. Just nothing that's really blown it out of the water.
Yeah, I think last year they went a bit maybe too overboard and like dived into theatrical, and they're like, we're going to have, a theatrical film every other month, and and they just kind of, I don't think they did a great selection in terms of what went to theatrical either. Like, I can't believe they didn't do Wolves, but they did like Fly Me to the Moon. Like, Fly Me to the Moon is like an all right film, but in terms of like theatrical box office play, like Wolves had so much better chances, and it never got that opportunity. So I'm kind of hoping that they might get to like a steady state of like one a year, have one big like summer blockbuster play they can do theatrical and then do streaming the rest of the time. But so far, I mean, they haven't announced anything, right? And I think they're really trying to wait and see whether F1 is a success or not before they make a decision. The only thing I would say is Joseph Kosinski's next project is that UFO film that Apple bought the rights for, and that has theatrical attached to it. So maybe the next Apple theatrical film will be another Joseph Kosinski play, but that obviously won't come out for a few years.
Yeah.
All right, well, final verdict and recommendations on F1 the movie. Who is this for? And also, F1 rights are up soon. What's the chances? I mean, obviously, Apple have drawn a good relationship with F1. So, do you see that possibly happening? And F1 rights coming to Apple?
I think it's possible. Out of all the sports leagues that exist in the country or the world, F1 is on the up. And it's still quite small. So, like, on the scale of, it's going to be closer to the MLS in terms of how much it costs them versus, NFL or MLB or something. So, I think it's more manageable for them in terms of scale. So, I think I would go for it if I was them. I think it has pretty good alignment. And they've done the F1 film. They're doing a documentary on Hamilton. Eddie Q and Tim Cook have been at a load of races. They obviously enjoy the sport. I think it'd be a good chat for them to do it.
Yeah, they seem to have a good relationship with F1, and I think if this film does really well, then the F1 the brand are going to be very happy with that. So they're more likely to talk to Apple about it, and sets them off in a good position. So it may end up being just down to Apple whether they want to make that commitment in the end. Which hey, it'll be interesting to see. And they've certainly got. It may end up being that they could bring more some of their technological prowess into it. But I guess we'll see. It would be interesting to see if they do it. Yeah, for sure.
All right, final verdict and recommendations. Did you enjoy F1 the movie? Who do you recommend it to? And are you going to go and see it again theatrically during its run?
I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a solid 4-star film for me. I think if you like Top Gun Maverick, just go to see this film. Don't give it a second thought.
Yep.
That is, if you like those sorts of films, you are guaranteed to like this one. If you like F1, I think you would love this film. And I think if you just like, big popcorn cinema with big soundtracks, big visuals, thrills, some like fun but kind of slightly disposable characters, you're going to love this. In terms of seeing it again, I don't know whether I will. My wife is actually interested in seeing it, so we may end up maybe going to see it. And I would like to see it at the cinema again, I think. But in terms of Apple TV Plus at home, I might do, maybe if I watch it with my wife, maybe. But other than that, I don't know. Not.
It does feel a bit redundant after you've already seen it on IMAX, to watch it then at home.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, unlike Sigmund, I probably watch a film once and I can't watch it again for like 10 years because it could be the best film that's ever made and I can only watch it once because that's just my attention span. So, but yeah, I'd give F1 probably 4 out of 5 as well, like what you said. So
I'm going to end this on an outlandish statement. An Apple Vision Pro seller is what I'm going to say for those that can afford it. Because I think once they've seen it at IMAX, people are going to want to have that experience again and again.
I mean, you're not going to. This is not going to discourage you from getting a Vision Pro for sure. If I had a Vision Pro, I think I definitely would watch it again. Yeah, in Vision Pro.
Yeah, it might not be my favorite Apple original film, but it's probably the most mainstream one they've got. And like, it's because I'm trying to think of another Apple original film that's like this kind of popcorn fare. Everything else has tried to be a bit more niche or a bit more edgy. This one's just like straight up fun, I'd say.
Well, those were the thoughts on the film from myself and our special guests this week, Jonathan Reed and Benjamin Mayo. You and I will be talking about our thoughts in a future episode. I'm going to give it a little bit of a breather and a little bit of time to ruminate. But we got to talk about some of the behind-the-scenes tech, especially the iPhone camera tech used in this film. And I'm going to say off the bat, seeing this film on the biggest screen in the UK, possibly Europe, you cannot tell. But where do we want to start with this tech?
I think it's just pretty incredible that F1 the movie is now going to be among the films with that, at least partially, shot on iPhone label. And it's actually, I think it's also kind of amazing that we're only finding out about it so close to the premiere. Feels like something that Apple would be touting a little bit more. Maybe they will as it rolls out. But, of course, the iPhone in question isn't exactly the same as the iPhone that you carry in your pocket. But it's very cool, the story of how this all came together. So director Joseph Kosinski and cinematographer Claudio Miranda approached Apple as they were getting ready to film F1 because they had a problem. They wanted to shoot cinema quality footage from the driver's perspective during an F1 race. Now, if you watch F1, especially if you watch it in the app, you'll know that you can watch the races from the driver's perspective, but those cameras are broadcast quality, not cinema quality. And so trying to mesh that footage together with the rest of the footage for the film would have been impossible. You would have been able to tell when you were watching it on a huge screen. And so they had to come up with a solution. And so Apple's engineering team actually got to work doing dedicated work for F1 the film, which is pretty incredible in and of itself that Apple dedicated staff to this problem. But it's even more amazing the solution that they came up with.
It really was. So in a collaborative effort, Apple combined a 48 megapixel iPhone camera sensor, a neutral density filter, an A-series chip, custom iPhone firmware, and an iPhone battery into a form factor built to replace F1's normal broadcast cameras, precisely in both size and weight. It had to endure, of course, extreme shock, vibrations, and heat, which still kind of blows my mind. I can't quite work out the magic that's going on here. And of course, the footage was captured in log, in ProRes format, with the Academy color encoding system. And all of this was connected to an iPad via USB-C to control settings and recording due to F1 regulations prohibiting active radios in the cars, because of course this was filmed during a proper F1 season where Apple and the production team had their own paddock. And I mean, really, this is out of this world.
Yeah, it's absolutely astounding what they were able to do here. And it's not confirmed, but there's even some speculation that maybe this effort is what led to log coming to the iPhone camera for everyone, which is kind of cool. Whether it was one way or the other, it's awesome that it worked out for the film and for regular filmmakers to be filming in log with their iPhones as well. We've seen a lot of productions that bring iPhone into the mix as cameras, including Apple itself with keynote videos. And I'd say the results are stunning. I mean, the first Apple keynote that I watched, they had the surprise reveal at the end that it was shot with iPhone, and I had no idea. I think maybe some people, if you were looking really closely, you could tell, but it really was amazing what they were able to get out of it. And in this case, it's taking that concept to a whole other level with extreme sports conditions added into the mix. Not to mention the fact that this footage is being shot as part of a film headed to IMAX theaters. So the size of the screens that this is going to be displayed on is just astounding, that it's all coming from a little iPhone camera that we all carry in our pockets. And I think it speaks to the democratization of this technology and also just the incredible effort by Apple's engineers here to create something that can capture this footage that looks so good. This film, even from the trailer, just looks incredible. It looks great. And you've seen it now on the big screen. Did it look like it was shot on an iPhone to you?
I mean, let's be clear. Not all of it was shot on iPhone, just like certain angles, but you cannot tell. That said, the editing in this is incredible. As we've discussed in our conversation with Jonathan and Benjamin, you know, the editing, the VFX, the post-production is just so seamless and so natural. You cannot tell. You just think it's all straight out of the camera. And that is like the gold star for any VFX or post-production house. So, yeah, mind-boggling. Absolutely mind-boggling.
Filmed for IMAX and also available in 4DX, F1 the Movie is in theaters worldwide today and in the US this Friday.
Monday wasn't just the date for the European premiere of F1 the Movie. It was also the day in which Beta 2 arrived for the developer betas across all platforms. I have yet to have a chance to install any of the Beta 2s just yet, so I'm looking forward to seeing what discoveries may be in store. Have you had a chance to check anything out just yet?
I've installed several of them. Of course, it's that summer season where you could basically set your clocks by new betas coming out and that process of updating all the devices as they come out. I think what we're seeing right now is the first tweaks to Liquid Glass and some of the just minor changes there. And of course, the fixed Finder icon on the Mac that so many people have been desperately hoping for. It's here. It looks great now. And hopefully everyone can be happy with the new one. But yeah, I think for the most part, what we're going to be seeing over the summer, a lot of it's going to be changes to Liquid Glass and making it easier to parse as you're looking at it. And that's definitely what we're seeing in this first set of betas. And yeah, it's fun to be on the beta train and see these changes as they're coming out.
And for those lucky enough to be on it, or brave enough to be on these betas, be sure to file your feedback, because this is the time where, you know, it's not too late to make changes, as we've seen across other platforms in the past. Now, in terms of app news, a surprise actually for me, and a welcome surprise, Vimeo has returned to Apple TV nearly 2 years to the day since the company removed support for all smart TV platforms, which, let's be honest, for a video platform is a strange move, but we forgive and forget here on Magic Rays of Light, because this new app is really, really cool. It's very basic, but there are some nice enhancements. Vimeo using Apple's video player. There's a heart button for favoriting a video. There's a chapter selection. There's also your audio and subtitle options. But one thing that I thought, and I was surprised to see, and then I thought, oh, this is really strange because we never saw this happen in the TV app, is there's actually choices for different speeds within this app to watch things. And it made me wonder. I was like, we've had the speed options on Mac OS and iOS for must be coming on to like 2 years now. Where are the speed options for the TV app?
I think it's a controversial decision to add the speed controls, and so maybe Apple's not wanting to do that on the dedicated TV platform where people who really love film are going to be spending the most time. I don't know. Maybe it makes sense to have it on mobile where you might be in a hurry or out and about and not as much at home when maybe you have more time. I don't know. I personally probably wouldn't take advantage of them myself. I'd like to take things in for the most part at normal speed. Maybe there's some things on Vimeo that you could take in at a faster speed. Vimeo has a pretty wide array of things that you can watch. It's like YouTube in that way in terms of there's so many things that you could take in. So maybe it makes sense for Vimeo, but it is interesting that it's included in the stock video player, but not in the TV app.
And let me be clear to listeners, this is just a question, not a request, right? I'm the purist that doesn't want this to happen, but it was just an interesting tidbit. Let's talk about some Apple original news, quite a bit this week.
Yeah, we're going to start with some fun kids and family news. Yo Gabba Gabba Land will return for a second season on Friday, January 30th on Apple TV+. And in the meantime, young viewers and families can catch up on the first season, as well as the entire 4-season run of the original Yo Gabba Gabba, which landed on the service last Friday alongside the renewal announcement. So that's pretty cool to see. I think we had 1 season of Yo Gabba Gabba that came with the first season of Yo Gabba Gabba Land, but now the full run is available on Apple TV+. So Apple TV+, now the home for Yo Gabba Gabba and its spinoff, and you can have more of it starting in January.
I love this rollout, right? It's reminiscent of what Apple have done with Fraggle Rock and, of course, the Peanuts collection as well. More and more entertainment for the kids and family. And Yo Gabba Gabba, I'll be honest, I kind of ignored when it came out because, obviously, it's not aimed at me. But looking at some of the artists and musicians involved in this, might be worth a whirl privately, you know? In production news, Apple original series Lucky, starring Anya Taylor-Joy, wrapped shoots this past week, and as reported by Deadline, filming has been suspended on Apple TV Plus's untitled Brothers comedy series from Skydance Television, starring and executive produced by Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson. According to sources, production in Austin, Texas was paused late last week when then showrunner David West Reed departed, as 8 of the series' 10 ordered episodes had been shot following differing views on the direction for the show's conclusion. Lee Eisenberg of Little America and Lessons in Chemistry fame is in negotiations to come on board as showrunner for the last 2 episodes and likely reshoots. Sad to see, really, for the relationship between Apple and David West Reed after, of course, the premature end to Big Door Prize. But yeah, hopes and fingers well and truly crossed for however everyone decides to finish this project. We look forward to seeing it on our screens, hopefully very, very soon.
Yes, this is one we've both been excited about, and Lee Eisenberg is a creative that I definitely have a lot of trust in based on his past work, so hopefully he's able to get in there and get them across the finish line. And I love the concept for this series, and I understand why creatively it might be hard to work out exactly how it's going to end, but I hope they're able to figure it out and give us something really fun and funny. That's what I'm really hoping for. Finally, filming for the second season of Bad Monkey will begin in September, as revealed by executive producer Bill Lawrence, who also said that scripts for the season are nearly complete. The second season will tell an all-original story with input from Carl Hiaasen, the author of the Bad Monkey novel. Now, there is a sequel to the Bad Monkey novel that Bill Lawrence said they will eventually adapt, but it doesn't include some of the characters from the first season, and they really want to stick with them for now. So the plan is to do an original story and eventually get to that sequel novel at another time. So I'm actually excited that they're keeping some of the cast in for season 2. And Bad Monkey, a series we both enjoyed, and looking forward to seeing it carry on as it begins shoots in September.
Yeah, and creatively, I guess it's going to be a really interesting to see how they transition between both novels and that original story, and how they move characters on and introduce others. So, yeah. Really cool. That's everything currently shooting, but what's in development?
Well, we'll start with something that actually isn't currently in development. Kind of a mix of good and bad news this week, Sigmund, but we share it all. According to Leslie Goldberg at The Ankler, the Speed Racer series being developed by J.J. Abrams' company Bad Robot is no longer headed to Apple TV+. The show is currently on the lookout for a new writing team before being shopped around to streamers. This is one that was announced a long time ago. I don't know that Apple actually ever even put out a press release about it, but we had heard about it and covered it, and we hadn't heard anything for a while, so it seems like maybe a little bit of a reapproach there, different writing staff, and a different partnership in terms of release. So, we'll see what happens there, but currently that's not headed to Apple TV+. Meanwhile, Apple has signed a first-look film deal with Peter Chernan's North Road, the company behind Ford vs. Ferrari, Netflix's Fear Street franchise, and Apple Original Series C, Truth Be Told, and Chief of War. So the company has worked with Apple on series before. They were in a 5-year deal with Netflix for films, and that has expired. And now they'll be moving over to Apple TV Plus for the film side as well. So I'm excited to see what comes out of that collaboration.
And it's interesting to see the similarities and obviously the connections with Tropper, right? And Tropper Inc. So it's interesting to see more of that kind of creative unit come into the fold. But now for Apple Original Films. Let's talk about some FYC news this week. Of course, we're almost at Emmy nomination season, but we're not quite there just yet. Instead, we have 13 nominations this week for the 16th Dorian TV Awards, with nominations for Severance, The Studio, Pachinko, and Deaf President Now. Winners of the Dorian TV Awards will be announced on July 8th at 8 a.m. Pacific.
This week we also saw the 2025 Black Reel TV Awards nominations, including 20 nominations for Apple Originals across a variety of series, including Dope Thief, Shrinking, Severance, The Studio, Government Cheese, The Big Cigar, Presumed Innocent, Lady in the Lake, Number One on the Call Sheet, and a nomination for the Apple Music Super Bowl halftime show starring Kendrick Lamar. Winners will be announced August 18th. Congratulations and best of luck to the nominees.
Plenty of titles there that you may need to catch up on over the coming weeks, but we've got a packed week yet again for Apple TV releases. Of course, today sees the international theatrical premiere of F1 coming to cinemas in the US on Friday. And for those that have yet to purchase their tickets, you can use code ApplePay10 on Fandango to get $10 off 2 tickets to the film when using Apple Pay. Now, on my way to Sheffield last weekend to see upcoming Apple original documentary Come See Me in the Good Light, which we'll be talking about at some point before its release in the fall, I noticed on my Apple Vision Pro, because I do wear it in public and I have no shame about it, I noticed the inclusion of F1 Hot Lap Immersive on Apple Vision Pro as a special extra. Of course, we got the haptic extra on iPhone just the other week, and we talked in depth about that one. But F1 Hot Lap Immersive, a really cool experience, because you're in the car with Brad Pitt, who I think was being quite cautious on this hot lap. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if I had an immersive camera strapped to my car, I'd be pretty careful too. But it's cool to get to just ride along with him as he's practicing. There's a little bit of an introduction from Joseph Kosinski where he talks about the fact that Brad Pitt had to train to do this, to get the footage to look realistic. And it's cool to see the experience of him driving on that track all by himself, just one car at night, and getting that first-person perspective. It's a very cool experience. And if you have a Vision Pro, definitely check it out, or, of course, check it out in in-store demos as well. It's a great way to get a little bit of behind the scenes from a first-person perspective of F1 the movie.
Also today sees new episodes of The Buccaneers and Stick, alongside the return of MLS Game Day on MLS Season Pass. And on Friday we see the 2-episode premiere of our streaming highlight this week, Smoke, which we'll be talking about in a matter of moments, alongside a new episode of Murderbot and the penultimate Long Way Home. And of course, Friday evening sees Friday Night Baseball at 7 p.m. Eastern, Tampa Bay Rays at Baltimore Orioles, and St. Louis Cardinals at Cleveland Guardians, followed by another MLS Game Day on Saturday and on Sunday. Sunday Night Soccer, Columbus versus Philadelphia, available to all. But that's not all.
That's right. For all you film collectors out there, The Instigators, I know one you've been waiting to add to your collection segment, will be available for PVOD on Tuesday. You can actually pre-order it in the TV app now. And in terms of extras this week, we've got a fun Apple Arcade ad called Hold That Train, featuring a lot of characters from Apple Arcade games trying to catch a train alongside the person who's playing the game on their phone. It's pretty cool. And a new shot on iPhone 16 Pro short film called Big Man, starring Stormzy, the latest in Apple's 10-year Cannes Grand Prix winning series, an announcement that was made this week as well, that the series won a Grand Prix award at Cannes, which is very cool. And of course, also available alongside it is a behind-the-scenes featurette. In terms of Apple Original extras this week, we've got the opening title sequence to Stick, a behind-the-scenes of Echo Valley featuring Julianne Moore and Sydney Sweeney mastering Kintsugi, and from Severance. This is deep in the archive segment. I know a lot of people are going to be excited to see this one. It's Deacon Lockman's casting tape, and very cool to see that. Just a little bit of Severance history to keep all our minds on the show. A very cool clip there that we'll, of course, link in the show notes alongside all of these extras and releases.
So a lot to catch up on, but there is one title that we have yet to talk about, and I cannot wait because this comes from the makers of Blackbird, a favourite of ours, and that is Smoke. When an arson investigator begrudgingly teams up with a police detective, their race to stop two arsonists ignites a twisted game of secrets and suspicions.
Fire isn't just an element. Fire is an organism. Fire watches.
I have 2 serial arsonists working this area. No significant leads on either.
You need to get somebody quick before one of them kills again.
What's the motive?
Serial arsonists tend to be powerless in their own lives. They want other people to know what that feels like.
Whatever you do, whatever you know, fire puts a lie to it all.
From Apple Studios, created, written and executive produced by Dennis Lehane, based on true events and inspired by Truth Media's acclaimed Firebug podcast, this stars Taron Egerton and Journey Smollett, with an ensemble cast including Rafe Spall, Ntutugama Mabahe Mwine, Hannah Emily Anderson, Anna Klumsky, Adina Porter, Greg Kinnear, and John Leguizamo. We're going to have to skirt around a few details on this one, Devon. But this is a spoiler-free highlight on a show we implore everyone to watch Friday's 2-episode premiere at their earliest opportunity. The show's synopsis is self-explanatory, and I think along with the clip, and it's a deeply layered, fun watch as brilliantly written, but I think it's safe to say the series' multiple narrative strands would fall apart without the exceptional on-screen talent involved. And this series really is all about the characters. So I think that's where we have to start. It's 2 main leads and their partnership, and I think the exceptional chemistry on screen.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Let's start with Taron Egerton's Dave Goodson. He's a former firefighter, now working as an arson investigator, chasing 2 serial arsonists. He also happens to be a stepfather and an aspiring writer. And you tell from the start that he has a healthy respect for fire after being caught up in one himself in the line of duty. We see a flashback to him being caught in a very precarious situation, and he actually talks about it quite a bit throughout the first episode, how that kind of inspired him to move into the investigation area. If I had to describe his personality, I'd say he's well-meaning, but also a bit self-absorbed. He doesn't really see the way he grates the people around him because he's just so focused on his own stuff, especially his book, which I think is a hilarious little detail about his character. I love when he has to put on the glasses to start working on his notes. That's just such a nice little touch for Taron Egerton's character, and a little bit different from what we saw from him in Blackbird, where he was, I think, a little bit more, he was a rough character in Blackbird. He was also a little bit more likable, I think. Here, he's purposely putting on a little bit more of a grating personality that I think it works well for him. He pulls it off with a smile. I enjoy seeing him take on that side of the role. Then, of course, you've got Journey Smollett as Michelle Calderone. a detective assigned to the arson investigation as Goodson's partner, which is seen by everyone around her, including herself, as a punishment for something, being moved into the arson area. That's not a place where you're going to go take off your career. I think they mentioned that arson has a really low rate for the people being found, and so she's kind of just being sent to this pushing a rock up a hill kind of task. But she's a former Marine contending with some sort of childhood trauma around fire, as well as a messy breakup that blurs the lines between personal and professional. And you can tell just from the moment we meet her, she's clearly carrying a lot, but she's managing it all with this very professional exterior. When she comes into Goodson's office for the first time, you can tell she's very capable and confident in her job. And she's asking him these questions about his tactics as an investigator. And, he thinks, oh, she doesn't know anything about arson. She's not going to be able to figure this out. And she very quickly shows that she's up to the task. And so I really like the dynamic between the two of them. They're initially unfriendly, but they're not hostile towards each other. You can tell that neither of them super wants to be there from the start, but the dynamic between them doesn't dwell on their conflict, which I appreciate. So we very quickly see them become partners and comrades as they respect each other. And one thing I love, a little detail throughout the first 2 episodes, is the changes in their office space throughout the first 2 episodes that show they're becoming more and more partners. You see Michelle's desk become bigger as they work together more, and it's just cool to see. I expected it to be a lot more like bickering between the two of them, and I appreciate that we didn't dwell there for very long.
Yeah, and I think probably the one kind of little bit of conflict there initially is where Michelle very much is coming into a space that doesn't have the resource that she's probably used to. She has some ingenious ways of tracking down arsonists, which are just kind of dismissed off the bat because of the cost involved. And that's very, very frustrating for her. But she's trying to find a way of solving this mystery that had been lingering for I think a couple of years up until that point. So it's fascinating, and of course this show is very much anchored by that duo, but there are other characters that I want to get into. Let's talk about Steve Burke, played by an unrecognizable Rafe Spall, not the bumbling daddy in Trying, and we can't wait for that series to return at some point in the near future. But Stephen Burke, we're introduced to him almost in Pitch Black Darkness, I think for that effect. And he's got a really interesting relationship with Michelle.
Yeah, he's Michelle's ex and a captain in the police force. And so that dynamic makes it really hard to know what to make of him and the things he says to her, because they could really be interpreted a lot of different ways. They could be interpreted as threats. They could be interpreted as pleas from a romantic partner who's being scorned. But it's just an interesting role for him after seeing him as, the scruffy, lovable guy and Trying. I was looking for Rafe Spall throughout the first episode, and I spent probably 5 minutes watching him on screen before I realized, oh, that's who he is. It's amazing. And total transformation for him. Clean-shaven, American accent, just very, very different for him, but it's cool to see him included in the series. Another big character is Freddie Fasano, played by Natari Gumabamahawine. He's a fast food cook who we quickly learn is up to much more than just frying chicken. And he's kind of set up as an antagonist, but he's also someone the viewer learns to have sympathy for, and I think that's a really interesting dynamic there. The more time you spend with him, the more you see his humanity and almost start to root for him. At least that was the feeling that I got. And it's just a very interesting kind of cognitive dissonance there, but an interesting character for sure. And then the last really major character in the first few episodes is Harvey Englehart, played by Greg Kinnear. He's a firefighter who comes under suspicion as a potential arsonist early in the duo's investigation. So Michelle comes in, she kind of reignites the investigation, gets some new resources in there, and they start to develop some suspicions. And this guy becomes the center of their investigation at the beginning. And another interesting role for Greg Kinnear here, and a great inclusion in the series.
There's a really interesting and I think biting line where he questions Michelle's employment as a DEI hire. And I think in a lot of ways, Michelle's character is being underestimated here. So in terms of the structure, Each episode begins with a word and its meaning and pronunciation, which was perplexing at first, but it soon makes a lot of sense once the mystery unfolds. And this is something I would say on a number of levels here.
Yeah, and this is a really compelling mystery, but to me it doesn't seem to be following a lot of the tropes of its genre. First of all, there's two culprits, right? Which usually in a mystery there's one that they're looking for. But even though there's two culprits and so much more to investigate, the mystery quickly becomes less about who's doing it, but about why they're doing it. And I think that's a really interesting way of going about it. There's also lots to explore in each of the main characters psychologically that will certainly impact the investigation going forward. So there's mysteries upon mysteries. There's the arsons, of course, but there's a lot going on with each of the characters as well, a lot to dive in there. And yeah, I think this is just, to me, it's just taking a different approach to the structure of mystery in a way that I'm finding satisfying after the first two episodes and look forward to seeing it play out.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And just from a technical aspect, some really interesting editing choices throughout, which I thought were like really brave and fresh. I then looked at Blackbird and to see what they did, because I didn't really remember it for some of the like transitional edits, but there are some really kind of like shocking cuts for some of the scenes for some of the victims in that. There's something similar happening here, but it's more experimental in the sense that, you know, it's a lot of cutting of different shots as a collage, really, to show how time has passed quickly. There's also some incredible effects going on here with regard to like some of the burning embers that appear during like this euphoric state of one of the arsonists who's revealed early on. And that depiction was both terrifying and yet equally exhilarating, which is a real shocker, but it's something that carries on so well for this particular character. And then I think we have to very quickly mention the music. The theme is stunning and is from Tom York, which I had no idea. I think we always have a bit of a surprise. Every theme seems to be able to pick some popular artist. I mean, we had Pharrell Williams not that long ago with Government Cheese, which I feel like most people glossed over. But to get Tom York on board for this, wow. We also got a couple of like bizarre inclusions early on.
Yeah, there's a music moment in episode 2 that I think is probably the most on-the-nose inclusion of a song I've ever seen in a film or TV show. A police officer shoots somebody, you know, they catch the bad guy or whatever, but then they go to celebrate, and the song playing that they're all singing along to, by the way, is Bang by AJR. And yeah, that really caught me. I mean, it's a great song. I love it. But in that context, I was like, wow, that's really just being very plain there about what you're celebrating. So yeah, some great music in the series as well. Some great moments there.
All right. Well, finally, 9 episodes for this series. Definitely treat the 2-episode premiere this week as one and watch back to back. I genuinely believe that patience is a virtue, and you'll be proved right in this regard as you're rewarded in week 1 and then rewarded each week thereafter. Smoke premieres with its first 2 episodes this Friday on Apple TV+. Definitely one to watch.
So that's the Apple Originals this week, Sigmund, but of course there's always plenty more to watch out there in the Apple TV app. What are our TV app highlights this week?
Well, 2. One isn't actually on the TV app, but I think these are obvious picks this week. The Bear, Season 4, returns today on Hulu and Disney+. Cannot wait. I've actually got a Matty Matheson's sandwich themed party coming up. Matty Matheson, the famous Canadian chef who plays the janitor in this series. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to that and the sandwiches that we're going to create. Maybe I'll be sharing some at the end of the week if things go well. But of course, we've got Squid Game and its Season 3 premiere on Netflix on Friday as well. So lots and lots to watch, whether it's on the big screen in the theatre or at home this week. But we're going to end with our Up Next picks. 1 film documentary and 1 series. Devon, we are going into the world of Marvel once again.
We are. It's time to suit up with Ironheart on Disney Plus, which premiered yesterday with its first 3 episodes. This is a series that I've been looking forward to ever since the character of Riri Williams debuted in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, and she's finally getting her own series, which is awesome to see. It's created by Chinaka Hodge. It stars Dominique Thorne as Riri Williams, as well as Anthony Ramos, which is a really cool inclusion in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, someone I'm a big fan of. Excited to see him make his debut. And of course, it's executive produced by Ryan Coogler himself. This one sees Riri Williams returning home from Chicago after spending time in Wakanda, and she's a genius MIT student who, by the way, because she goes to MIT, we're going to see Jim Rash again in this series, because
Cool.
he's the dean of MIT in the MCU, which is awesome. And she builds an Iron Man style suit, and she's going to have her own superhero journey over 6 episodes on Disney Plus, kicking off this week. I'm really excited about it.
Very, very cool. I do feel like superhero-themed movies and TV shows are turning around in recent months. So looking forward to, I think Thunderbolts is out in just a couple of weeks on VOD. So that'll be something I'll probably be highlighting. But this, I feel like, is going to be a perfect reintroduction into the Marvel world ahead of that for me. Maybe they're out of sequence, but hey-ho. For me, my up next pick this week is a documentary about the American indie band Pavement. It's called Pavements, and it combines scripts with documentary images of the band and a musical mise-en-scène composed of songs from their discography. This is a band that I've been a fan of for a long, long time, and was really surprised to see this documentary in the list of films at last year's London Film Festival, but I didn't get a chance to go to the press screening for this one. So it's on my up next queue already. It's already been purchased. It came out on Tuesday, and very, very much looking forward to making time for that one this weekend. And hopefully there'll be some fans out there that didn't know about this and are just as surprised and hopefully happy with the results as I hope to be. So a packed week across all of your screens. And, well, a packed show.
Most definitely, but that's all from us for this week. One more time, a big thank you to Jonathan Reed and Benjamin Mayo for joining us this week to talk about F1 the movie. We'll leave their contact info in the show notes, along with ours as well. We'll be back next week as we take an early look at the Wild Ones and recap and preview the week in the world of Apple TV. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and have a great week.
Vroom vroom.